All right, here we go. So we'd like to welcome our speakers from the University of Northern California, Colorado, excuse me. And I will turn it over to Dr. Benedict and let her explain about the project and who she has with us today. Thanks to everyone for being here, and we'll regroup at the end for Q&A.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting us to come talk. Yes, my name is Lauryn Benedict, and I'm a professor at the University of Northern Colorado. And I and two other presenters today will be talking to you about our research and how we're using information that we hope you will help contribute to from companion parrots to study parrot learning capabilities, vocal evolution, all kinds of questions about why parrots can talk in the amazing ways that we all know they can, right? So just to introduce our presenters, as I said, I'm Lauryn Benedict. We're also later going to hear from Karla Vilches Castaño and Wynn Webster, and they're going to tell you about some of the research that they're doing as graduate students on this project. So that's our overview. And just to kind of introduce our big larger group, we are part of a research group that I'll tell you more about in a moment that we're calling the Many Parrots Research Group. Can you see my cursor moving around when I do this? Yes, all right. And we have a website at manyparrots.org if you want to check it out, and you can learn more about what we're doing there. But of course, I'm going to tell you a lot of that today. So let's get going with this. Essentially, we are asking questions about why parrots can learn so many different things, right? Why they are such good vocal learners. And what we're going to really talk about today is kind of given in this talk outline here. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where this project came from, a little bit about myself and the generation of the project and why we're so interested in parrots as vocal learners and all of the amazing mimicry they can do. And then we're going to hear about some current research using some of our data, and that's going to be Wynn's section of the talk, where Wynn will talk about this project, What Does Polly Say? One of our two kind of named research projects. And then after that, Karla is going to talk a little bit about the Sing Along and Speech project. So this is our other big research project. And if you go to our website, it looks like this. You can see the image and you can see these two projects. It's two different surveys where we ask people who live or work with companion parrots to fill out the surveys and tell us things about their parrots' vocal repertoires and give us recordings of their parrots speaking and mimicking human sounds so that we can try and understand things like how well are parrots able to mimic humans, and are some species better than others? And do they get better with age? Are males better than females? Are females better than males? Questions like that. These are all the kinds of things we're trying to understand. So that's the overview of the talk. And before I get too far into it, I do want to say that this is part of a much larger group. If you go to that manyparrots.org website, there's an About Us page there. And on that About Us page, you can read about the three of us who are here today. And you can also read about our many collaborators around the world. So we have a really great interdisciplinary team working on this. We have a number of bird researchers, such as myself. And then we have a number of linguists, people who are coming at it from that language side of things. And that includes people like Eva Reinisch and Victoria Gross, who are in Vienna, Austria. We have some parrot experts in particular. I'm sure you will all recognize Irene Pepperberg here in the center. Christine Dahlin is also a parrot researcher, as is Marissa Hoschelli down here, and Yoshimasa Seki. So this is really, again, they're all over the world. Dr. Seki is in Japan, for example. And then we also have a team interested in animal musicality. Do animals understand sort of the musical elements of sounds the way that humans do? And so that team includes people like Henken Honing and Michelle Spearings and others, and they're in the Netherlands. So fun team. Beyond that, we also have a couple of Polish collaborators who are really involved in efforts to spread the word about, parrot well-being and parrot learning in Poland as well. So that's our team. Feel free to read more at the website. It's really been fun for us to work with people around the world, and it's pretty cool because having all of these collaborators means that we can run the surveys that I'm going to tell you about in multiple languages. So we actually have our surveys in 8 languages. And on the team, we have somebody who speaks all of them, which is pretty amazing. So if somebody submits information about a Japanese parrot and the sounds that they make, we have our Japanese collaborator who is taking that data and helping us to translate and understand what's going on there. So interesting things we can ask about how parrots learn in different languages too. Okay, but first, I thought I would start by just telling you a little bit about myself and how I got into parrots. I did not start as a researcher studying parrots. I'm a biologist who studies bird song and sounds in general. I'm just really have always been fascinated by this question: why do birds sing? Right? Birdsong is beautiful. It's ubiquitous. We hear it out there in the world. We enjoy it. It sometimes feels like they're just singing for us to make us happy or to express their own happiness. But of course, we know that they are using song to communicate with other birds, to say, hey, come mate with me, or no, this is my territory, stay away, right? That's a lot of what birds are singing to each other. So I have sort of spent a career asking questions about how birds learn their vocalizations, why different species sound different from each other, and why individuals of the same species might sound different from each other, right? Why does one bird vocalize in a really complicated way and another member of that same species have a much simpler repertoire? And so these are the questions that kind of fascinate me and drive my research, and have for a long time. And I, for much of my career, was looking at these questions in songbirds. So sparrows, wrens, warblers, swallows, lots of different wild songbirds. I always worked with wild birds previously. And then I started thinking about this, and I was particularly interested in differences between males and females, because among songbirds, males do most of the singing. So females have been much less studied, and I've been studying females a lot, and it's really interesting to look at female vocalizations and compare them with males. And so I started thinking about ways in which we could study both males and females, and it really, jumped out at me that I've been working on species where females do sing less: sparrows, wrens, warblers, swallows, etc. And there's a lot you can learn about bird vocalizations, bird learning of songs from those birds. But there are also other birds that learn their vocalizations, and parrots are an excellent model, and in fact, maybe in some ways, arguably a better model for studying vocal learning, because they can learn so much. And in parrots also, you get a lot of vocalizations from both males and females. So I thought, all right, I should look into this. And then the other thing that's really, fascinating about parrots is that there are so many species of them, and you can study just so many different things about them. So I'll take a step back here for a second and just say, is this learning unusual, right? Everybody studies songbirds, everybody studies parrots. Why do we study learning in those species? Well, because it is actually quite unusual. If you look across all birds, there are only 3 major groups of birds that learn their vocalizations. And these are the Oscine songbirds here at the top, so sparrows, wrens, warblers; parrots, which you all know learn incredible vocalizations, and then hummingbirds also seem to learn their vocalizations, but they have somewhat simpler vocalizations, and we know less about learning in hummingbirds. In this group, right, passerines have been by far the most studied. We know a lot about songbird learning. We know much less about parrots, but parrots learn in really incredible ways. So again, this seems like a group that is kind of ripe for study. We can learn a lot from them. What do we know about parrot vocal learning of all kinds of sounds and songs? Well, really interesting. We actually know an awful lot about the kind of physiology and mechanisms within their body that promote this. We know the brain regions that are responsible for this. And you can see here, this is an illustration that shows you the brains of songbirds, the brains of parrots, and the brains of hummingbirds. And if you've ever seen a map of a human brain with like the Broca's area highlighted and the other vocal learning, speech and language areas highlighted in the human brain, this is essentially doing the exact same thing for birds. And you can see there are a lot of highlighted areas. We know a lot about bird brains and the song system that allows birds to learn and produce sounds. We have mapped those areas of the brain, and we know that there are, for example, genes that are shared between humans and birds that are homologous to each other. They're essentially the same gene, just evolved into these different groups. And those genes are important for language learning in humans, and they're also important for sound learning and vocal learning in birds. So lots of really cool analogies with humans. And we have all this understanding of the brain. What we don't have is an understanding of the behavior. So we know, for example, that different species of parrots have brain song learning sections that look different, but we don't really know which species of parrots learn the most. And that's something that seems like information we would want, and a major opening for collection of data relating to vocal behavior. So this kind of led to the projects that we started. And it actually is a really kind of an interesting story. You would think that we would know a ton about parrot vocalizations because they're so vocal, right? Wild parrots are out there making tons of sounds all the time. Why don't we know what they're saying? With songbirds, we have so much information. You go out, you record your songbirds. You can put little colored bands on the legs of individual songbirds, and then you know who's who. So you might put red bands on one bird and blue bands on another, and then you can record them and understand, oh, the red-banded bird has more variety in its song than the blue-banded bird. And so there's lots of work doing this on lots of different species of songbirds. There is a good amount of work doing this on parrots, but not nearly as much as we have on songbirds. And parrots are actually incredibly hard to study, right? We don't have more information about different species of parrots because they are really, really challenging to work with in the wild. And I'm going to put up this picture again of Christine Dolan, who's one of our collaborators. Christine knows this firsthand. She has for 20 years now been studying yellow-naped Amazons. And she has amassed an amazing data set on the sounds that they make and how they communicate with each other. But it's taken 20 years to get that information about one species. And we don't, unfortunately, have that kind of access to wild populations of all of the species of parrots that exist. And so we don't have that kind of information, even for like wild gray parrots. So it occurred to us, me and Christine, and some of the others that we started the project with, well, you know, there's another set of parrots out there that maybe we could learn something about. And of course, that is companion parrots that live with humans. There are yellow-naped Amazons in captivity as well as in the wild. And perhaps we can study them to get some understanding of vocal learning along with all of the other species that exist. So that was kind of the genesis of this. I'll also say, this was sort of a COVID project. We couldn't do field work and we were sitting there twiddling our thumbs during COVID, and I couldn't go out and study sparrows and warblers and wrens. And I thought, well, what else can we do? And it led us to this project where we thought we can work with parrot owners to collect an awful lot of really interesting data. So we started first with one of our surveys that you'll find on the website, which is the What Does Polly Say survey. That one began during COVID 2020, 2021, around there. And I'm going to tell you today about some of the results, the earliest results published from this survey, what we've learned so far from that What Does Polly survey. What Does Polly Say survey, sorry. So we'll talk about that. So if you were to go to our website and click on that link, you would see a survey that looks like this. At the time, the results that I'm going to tell you about are from when we had 898 responses, so 900 birds, which, I mean, imagine going out in the field and trying to study 900 yellow-naped Amazons individually. That would be very difficult. So this allows us to get really great data. I checked in the other day, we now have 1220 responses, so even more, and we're in the process of analyzing the new ones now. And those responses all told us information about an individual bird. So that's, 1,200 individual birds that we have data on. And what we did is we asked people about the mimicry of humans, because we figure that when parrots learn to mimic human sounds, they are integrating themselves into their social flock, which is exactly why they learn sounds in the wild, is to integrate into their social flock. And by copying human sounds, they're doing that in their human environment. And it also means that we have some types of sounds that humans can pretty easily recognize and count and accurately report to us. So we asked people, how many different sounds that they've learned from humans does your bird make? So if they mimic a doorbell or a dog barking or something like that. And then we asked, how many different phrases does your bird say? So a phrase, Polly wants a cracker, step up, pretty bird, right? All of those are phrases. And then we said, could you count the words within the phrases? And if a bird says, Polly wants a cracker and Polly is a good bird, you would count Polly wants a cracker is good bird as words, right? And that gives us a sense of what they can learn. And it's actually really similar to wild communication, because often birds learn songs that consist of a whole set of sounds together and little syllables, which are pieces of those sounds. So we're considering a phrase to be kind of like a bird song and a word to be kind of like a syllable. And by having humans count the ones that their birds have learned, we can then compare using a standard number across all the different bird species in our survey. All right, so we got a lot of data on this topic, and our first paper that we published in an academic journal as a result of this project came out in 2022, so 2 years ago now, and it was in Scientific Reports. It's a free to access journal. If anybody would like to go read this paper, you're welcome to. You can just Google a survey of vocal mimicry in companion parrots, and it's also linked from our website. And in there, we reported a lot of what we learned. And so I'm going to show you some of the things that we learned from the data so far. All right, so just to tell you kind of how we approached asking some questions about what parrots learn in their vocal repertoires. From that What Does Polly Say data, we started with, as I said, about 900 responses. That included 78 species of parrots, and we had 19 species that we had at least 10 responses for. So we really kind of focused on them because we had a pretty good sample, a good number of parrots. I think that for African grays, we had something like 150 individuals in the data set. So some species were better represented than others. Of the group, about 300 were reported to be female, about 500 male. A lot of people said unknown. And we had a wide age range. So we had birds all the way from 0 to 54, although most of them were on the younger side of that. And then we also asked questions about how those birds, whether those birds regularly interacted with other parrots. Did they live in a household with other parrots? Did they, interact with them? And I'm not going to tell you too much about that today, but that's something we could talk about in questions if you're interested, because social behavior and social interactions is just another fascinating topic that we might follow up on. All right, and then we used all this data just essentially to ask which parrots are the best at vocal learning, right? Who's really good at learning new mimicry sounds? And we broke that down in a couple ways. So I'll go through some of that. First of all, we asked, does species matter? Are some species of parrots better vocal learners than others? What do you think? You can all in your head guess. What species do you think might be the best at learning new sounds? And I will show you some graphs if you all have your answer in your head. These are kind of very complicated graphs, so I will walk you through them. What I am showing you then is the number of different mimicry sounds, and a bar that goes further to the right is more sounds. The number of different phrases, Polly wants a cracker, and the number of different words that the survey takers reported on average in the vocabulary of their parrots for different species. And the parrots that we're including on this graph are the ones that we had at least 10 responses from. So we had, more than just one bird representing that species. And so here's data for blue and yellow macaws, sun parakeets, green-cheeked parakeets, Pacific parrotlets, etc. You can read all the species that we're including here. And the thing that probably jumps out is that this bar goes pretty far to the right, and so does this one, and so does this one. Gray parrots were absolutely reported to have the largest vocal repertoires, to be the best at mimicking human speech. And I don't think that surprised us, and I don't think that you all will be surprised at that, because they're very much known for that. Of course, they are incredible learners. They have amazing cognitive abilities. They can learn so many different sounds and words and phrases. And as we know from other studies, like with Alex and Irene Pepperberg's work, they can use those phrases in really appropriate ways. Sometimes they even understand cognitively a lot of what they are saying, which is pretty incredible. Other species that were pretty good, we had really reasonably large repertoires. So this is, on average, like 15 or 20 different phrases. In some of the other species, sulfur-crested cockatoos had pretty big phrase repertoires, turquoise-fronted parrots, blue and yellow macaws. In general, Amazons were pretty good at vocal learning. Cockatoos are pretty good too. Most of the species that we looked at had more words and phrases than sounds, But there were a few that were really good at mimicking sounds, but not words and phrases. So for example, Fisher's lovebird over here has a lot more sounds in their repertoire and a lot fewer words. And I wonder if, I don't know, some of you have species of birds where you see that they're better at one than the other. And that's another really interesting question that we're continuing to explore. Cockatiels, I think, also are somewhat known for that, right? And in our case, again, cockatiels had more sounds than phrases, which is interesting. All right, so yes, to our first question, does species matter in terms of the amount that a bird can learn? Yeah, birds of certain species learn more than others. I will also say here, though, that there is huge individual difference. For basically every single one of these species, we had some birds that had 0 words or phrases in their repertoire and some that had many more. So although species does matter, the individual and just who your bird is as an individual also matters a lot. There's a lot of difference there. All right, next question we asked, does sex matter? Remember, I am interested in male versus female vocalizations. I wanted to study this to try and understand how males and females might differ. So we looked at males and females in the data set to see if there were differences. And the first thing we did was not look at how many words males or females learned. First, we just looked at how many of the birds in our data set were male and how many were female. We're asking people to tell us about all of the different words their bird knows. If we only get data on males, does that mean that only males can learn words? Maybe. So we looked at the numbers, and we do have more males than females in the data set. And we thought, okay, interesting. Is that a hint that maybe males talk more than females? Maybe, because we wanted to follow up on this. And so here's our question, right? Does this mean that males are better mimics? We weren't 100% sure, because we also wanted to know how sure people were that they were reporting data on a male versus a female. So we asked them, how did you determine the sex of your bird? And we wanted to guarantee that males reported to talk more were truly males. And we had a number of different questions. In that question in the data set, we have a number of different possible answers. If the bird was genetically tested, we are very confident that they reported sex correctly. If the bird lays eggs, we're pretty sure it's a female. But if people reported, oh, I think it's a female because of behavior, we didn't really take that as strong evidence that they were sure of the sex of their bird. So we kind of classed sexing confidence into 3 ways. So high confidence are those birds that were genetically tested. Low confidence are those birds that they were like, oh, the previous owner thought it was a male. That doesn't necessarily tell us a whole lot. And then we looked at the number of males and females in each of those categories. And if you look at the number of males and females in each of those categories, we found this really interesting. In the high confidence birds, where they were genetically tested, we had about half males, half females in the data set. So almost as many females as males talking when people were confident of the sex. In those low confidence birds, that's where our preponderance of males came from. So we have a lot of people that didn't really know the sex of their parrot, but reported it to be a male. And I think that's a really interesting thing, right? That there is a tendency to think, oh, talking bird is a male. There's also just a tendency often to call animals he if you don't really know. I think it's kind of a thing that people do. And so we thought that was a really interesting takeaway, right? That probably a lot of people are making assumptions about whether their bird is male or female, and they're not sure. So get it genetically tested if you really want to know. And I'm sure many of you have. But I do think that that's an important takeaway. All right. So when we know the sex, males and females talk almost the same amount. But there still were lots of really interesting little subtle trends in different species. So I'll tell you about a few of them. So for example, in cockatiels, we have 86% of the birds reported in our study were males. And we had high sexing confidence. So they really were males. So that suggests that in this species, males might be more likely to learn and mimic humans than females. However, they didn't have different sized repertoires. So when females do mimic humans, they learn just as many phrases as the males. It's just that they're less likely to learn from humans than males are. So that's kind of interesting. Budgies, we did not have great sexing confidence. We weren't 100% sure that people were getting males and females right. But what they did report is that even among the birds where they had been genetically tested, males had larger repertoires of words and phrases. So that's one where there might be some sex differences. And that's a really interesting one because we know that in wild birds, males often move into new flocks and learn the flock calls of their mates when they're trying to woo a mate. So that ability to learn probably matches their natural behavior. And then in these beautiful macaws, we had only 35% of the birds reported were male. So we had a lot of females reported as good at learning to mimic humans. But when males were in the data set, they had more words. So maybe females have more tendency to mimic humans, but males learn a larger repertoire. And we're not sure because we don't have huge numbers for all of these species. So we're still collecting data and we're going to follow up on these trends with the additional numbers that we have. I will point out, though, that these species are unusual. Across the rest of the data set for African greys and everything else, we saw no differences really between males and females. Females and males learn equally well to mimic humans. All right, so what do we take away? Really interesting differences. Sometimes there might be male-female differences, but not always, and that seems to vary by species. All right, so yes, back to our major point though. In general, males and females are equally good vocal learners. So if you have an African gray or another species that we haven't mentioned here, males and females are probably similar. All right, and then the last question that I will mention here that we asked was, how does age matter? Do older birds have larger repertoires? Can they say more phrases, more words? And we know from studies of wild parrots, and I'm sure you all know too from living with parrots, that parrots can continue to learn throughout their lives. An older parrot can still learn new words. And that's actually really kind of interesting and unusual because in a lot of songbirds, the model for vocal learning in the animal kingdom, they stop learning after 1 or 2 years of age, and they're just fixed with their vocal repertoire. Other birds, like mockingbirds, can continue to learn throughout life, as can parrots, which is a really incredible ability. And again, that probably relates to their social behavior in the wild because they're often moving between new flocks, and every time they join a new flock, they can integrate themselves socially into that flock by learning the new flock calls. And they want to be able to do that, or they benefit from being able to do that throughout their life, even when they're older. So we thought, all right, we expect that our older birds can have bigger repertoires than our younger birds. Seems logical. And if we looked at our juvenile birds that are still kind of reaching adulthood, we find that if we look from ages 0 to 4, there's a clear increase in the number of words and phrases that birds say, right? So those very young birds don't have a lot of phrases. And this is showing you age, from 0 to 4. And those young birds really say nothing. And then the 4-year-olds get all the way up to, 10 phrases, maybe 60, something like that. And this is just for African greys, these data that we have here. Do they continue to learn throughout life? Do we then see that 40-year-olds have much larger repertoires than 4-year-olds? Interestingly, the answer there is no. They hit 4 years old, they're pretty good. It still maybe continues to slowly drift upward a little bit, but most of their learning is really during that juvenile phase. And statistically, if you run statistics on this, a 40-year-old doesn't have a larger repertoire than a 4-year-old, which we thought was really fascinating because we thought that repertoire would grow over lifetime. But it turns out this is actually another thing that's kind of parallel to humans. Humans learn most of their words early on, and then we don't really expand our vocabularies over our adulthood. We might a little, but we also will drop words out of our regular use. And that we think is what parrots are doing. We think that they're learning new sounds throughout their life, but they're also sometimes dropping words out of their repertoire, which is what they would do in the wild. When you join a new group, you start making the sounds of that new group, but you stop making the sounds of the old group. And therefore, they don't really continuously expand their repertoire, even though they can learn throughout life. So that we thought was a really kind of interesting pattern. All right, last couple of things I'll say here. We have a couple of other really just fun questions we asked people. Do your parrots use their words similarly to humans? Do they understand context? So we asked, does your parrot spontaneously use words in appropriate human contexts without being prompted? And then does your parrot improvise? Do they rearrange words and phrases? Because of course, this is a really important thing about language, is that I can put words in different orders within a sentence, and that changes the meaning. Do parrots rearrange their words? And I'll let you all think about whether your parrots do that. And then we also optionally ask people, what are just some of the words and phrases your parrot uses? Just because we were curious. So what did we learn? Well, for that question, does your parrot spontaneously use sounds in the right context? The overwhelming answer is yes. This is a small piece of the pie, right? It's something like 10% of birds, and this is averaged across species. So that 0 to 32 means in some species, there were no birds that never did this. And in others, 30% of birds did this. But essentially, never is a very small slice of this pie. Most species frequently use their words in the right context without human prompting, which is pretty incredible. So they're learning not just the sounds from humans, but also when to use it. And then a lot of species sometimes use them in the right context as well. We saw less tendency to rearrange words. So are birds improvising new sentences and new phrases? Sometimes, right? We have a lot of birds that sometimes do that, but we also have a lot of birds that never do that. 40% or so never rearrange their phrases. They always stick with the phrase that they learned. And then another, 40% sometimes rearrange, and it's only something like 20% that frequently will move words around. So that's quite different from humans in the rate there. But still shows some very potentially interesting cognitive behaviors and understanding of context and contextual use. And then the last, just what are some of the words and phrases that your parrot uses? We just made a little word cloud of some of the phrases or a lot of the words. So this is a word cloud for words that were reported more than 5 times each. And it's a lot of words you would expect parrots to say. Good, hello, bird, love, baby, come, you can look, see a lot of things. Step, bath, bye. I'm sure you see words that your parrot uses on here. There are, of course, some that we don't necessarily want to teach our birds, but they have learned. And that reoccurs throughout the data set because birds are very good at learning words that they hear have emotional content or import for the humans that they live with. All right. So that is kind of the end of my section of the talk. I'm gonna just go quickly through what we asked. So we wanted to know with our survey data, what predicts a parrot's ability to learn words and phrases? Well, first of all, the species does seem to matter. Some species are better learners than others, but there's a lot of variability. Does it matter whether you have a male or a female bird in terms of how much it can learn? Maybe in some species it might matter a bit, but in a lot of other species, no. So that's a really interesting. We hope to look with our collaborators at differences between species in males and females more in depth in the future. How about age? Does age matter? Well, we know they keep learning throughout life. They're going to learn a lot of new things when they're young. They can still, of course, add new words and phrases to the vocabulary when they're older, but their repertoires don't seem to expand much. And I would love to hear from all of you if you have that experience or if you feel like your birds as adults are really expanding their repertoires, because that's something that fascinates us. We know that they can use words, phrases, and sounds in context very well. But when they learn, they mostly learn a phrase as is. They might rearrange it a little. They're rarely rearranging words in the way that humans do. All right, so those are my big takeaways from kind of what we're doing here. And that is the sort of first set of results from our What Does Polly Say survey. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Wynn to talk about their research that they are doing using that same survey data on words and phrases. All right, so here we go.
Sweet. Thank you, Lauren. So I'm Wynn. I'm a master's student at the University of Northern Colorado. So I'll also give a little bit of background about myself. I first got into my love of birds when I lived in Maryland on a chicken farm, and I got to raise multiple flocks, and I got really intrigued with like the coloration differences, how they interacted with each other, and just everything that makes birds so wonderful and lovely. So when I moved out to Colorado after getting my bachelor's, I started working in a lab at Colorado State University that works with kind of more of a genomic aspect of birds. So I worked with telomeres, so genetic coding that shortens over the age or if there's extra stress of a lifetime. I worked with that with some songbirds. Specifically, I did it with yellow warblers and black-capped chickadees. And I looked at this telomere degradation over their life with feathers and blood. And so I got a lot of really good experience not working with parrots, but working with songbirds. And you can see below, there's some of my fun photos from banding. So like there's blue jays, and that was actually one that was growing some new feathers in. There's a dark-eyed junco in the middle. And then the one that has me actually banding it is a very upset female house finch. And then I worked with well, I have personal birds. You might hear them throughout my or Karla's talk. They're in that upper right-hand corner. There's one of them there. They are doves. So we have a couple of doves in the room as well. But then I moved over to UNC and I turned that research and love of birds into more specifically parrots. So Lauren, you can go. So my specific thesis project focuses on that first survey, the What Does Polly Say survey, and I ask about repertoire evolution. So the vocal learning of these parrots, how it evolved, and specifically how it evolved with other known traits. So you can click, yeah. So some examples that we have that I can just give you that we're kind of seeing how they react and relate to this repertoire is, for example, flock size. So if your parrots are in these big, large flocks, does that mean that they are in general going to have a larger repertoire throughout their life? There's the next one, which is social bonds. So if they're chatting with each other, if they're like communally breeding and helping out with other ones and just all that sociality part, does that possibly create a larger repertoire? There's longevity. So this is a pretty strong hypothesis, at least for me as well, is parrots are these lifelong learners we saw. So if they live longer, does that mean they're going to have that higher repertoire? There's also beak measurements. This is kind of the most vague of them all, but basically if they have like a really large beak, so they have this larger oral cavity basically in comparison to their body, does that mean they're going to have better ability to make these sounds and maybe they'll learn more and they'll have more? And then coloration is an interesting one. You can reason both ways. You could say, all right, they have these varying colors, all these different colors that would evolve maybe with repertoire. So these bright birds with all this variation would have also this huge variation in their vocal learning. Or you could say it's opposite, that maybe they have all this bright coloration, so they might be able to track each other easier and not need as much like diversity or amount in their vocal learning. And then the last of our hypothesized ones right now is brain size. So if they have kind of similar to beak measurements, a very large brain in comparison to their body, does that mean that that brain is going to be able to help them basically just learn a lot more and have that higher repertoire? So those are some of the initial hypothesized questions that we have. And with our current about 1,200 responses, I basically take that and I analyze the repertoire. I have about 77 to 78 unique species, which is really, really cool. I basically take those three questions, how many words, how many sounds, how many phrases, and I average that out per species. So we decided to do some preliminary data. So we checked with flock size. So we said, all right, how about this average repertoire to maximum flock size? And the way that you can read this graph is it's basically a color gradient. So you can see on the left side, anything that's red is going to be a small value, and anything that gets to that cooler tone, that blue, is going to be a larger value. So you can see immediately on the left side, we do have some outliers like that African gray parrot right there. It's really high. I believe it's like average repertoire is at least 67 or something out of all of our responses. So we take all of those and then we see, all right, what about maximum flock size? All of these parrots that they're living with in the wild, and we got this maximum flock size data from eBird. How does that possibly work? And the one on the right is read the same way. That blue is that high number, that red is that kind of lower number. And we ratioed it out because budgies can be in extremely large flocks. And so if I had put the budgies in as not a ratioed out, my entire graph would have looked red. So, but this is our two. And based off initial like visual assessment, you can kind of assume we have some mixed results. So for examples, our cockatiels, our budgies, and our rainbow lorikeets, they show a pretty small repertoire, but a pretty large maximum flock size. So there's that inverse relation possibly. But then on the other side, we have species like the African gray that has a large repertoire and a pretty large flock size. We have species like the sun conure, which is small and small. And then we have species like the macaws, which are kind of all in that middle zone. They're like middle to high in maximum flock size. So unfortunately, all of that immediately says that we're not super confident that repertoire is related to maximum flock size. But that's only one of the many traits that we're comparing. And this is also all before we've done any statistical analyses and stuff. It's also possible that the maximum flock size might be related to another one of those traits that I listed. And then that trait is related to repertoire. There's a whole intermixing puzzle piece connectivity of it all. All that to say, I have some good data right now, but any more parrot responses that I get helps booster this data and make it more significant and give me better values. And it's just helps with all of it. So that is my preliminary data for my project with the What Does Polly Say survey. I will now let Karla talk about our second survey and what they've been doing with that one with more of vocal.
Thank you, Wynn. So yeah, I'm Karla. I'm also a master's student in Dr. Benedict's lab, just finishing up my first year here. I am a big fan of cockatoos and Amazons, but very much like Wynn and Lauren, my journey didn't necessarily begin with parrots. I did have a white cockatoo growing up that I absolutely adored. But when I was doing my bachelor's in biology, I was actually training to be a herpetologist. So I was studying reptiles and amphibians, specifically snakes. But through my bachelor's degree, I got to work with Puerto Rican lizard cuckoos and Adelaide's warblers, and that kind of like got me into the path of like this passion for studying animal behavior and cognition and communication, specifically in birds. And so after I graduated from my bachelor's, I got a job with the World Parrot Trust in a conservation project for the Puerto Rican Amazon, which is where my passion for specifically parrots began. And all of that led me here to Colorado and UNC with Dr. Benedict. And so in the next slide, we can see the project that I've been working on currently. It's the Bird Sing Along and Speech Project, which is the second survey that Wynn and Lauren were talking about. So this is a more recent project. We just recently released it summer this year. So this project asks participants to submit recordings of their parrots saying words, phrases, or sounds that they've learned from a human model, and then also submit a recording of the human model saying those words separately so that we can use both recordings and compare them with each other to see how similar they are. And so with this project, the questions that we want to answer are species that tend to learn more words or have a higher repertoire also able to replicate or copy their owner's voice? So the sound of their voice, is it similar as well? Are vowels easier to say for parrots than consonants? So that's one of the things that we've been thinking about. Vowels don't necessarily require as many like as much movement and as much like a technicality to pronounce versus consonants, which like usually require more tongue movement, more like vocal or like mouth movements to actually pronounce. And then with this information, we want to see how it relates to human language learning. Like Lauren was saying, parrots could be a really, really good model for studying just vocal learning in humans, because it seems like we learn very similarly. And so how are we doing this? In my approach to these questions, I want to see if I can marry both bird study techniques and human study techniques. So I would like to use research techniques that human linguists would use to study human speech, and also things like what we're about to see in a minute that we use to study birdsong. And so an example of this is these beautiful colorful graphs that we can see right here. This is an eclectus parrot, a female eclectus parrot, and her owner saying the word hello. And so it's really, really interesting because in these graphs, we can actually see individually the sounds that make up these words. So for the eclectus, right at the beginning, there's kind of like an empty space. That would be the H, because we don't really produce a sound when we say the H. And then right at the bottom, it's very, very barely visible, but I promise it's there. We can also see a little like divot where we can see the H right there. Right next to that, there's a bump with like some lines on top. That's an E. We call this a phoneme. So when we sound words or letters, that's what we call a phoneme. And so they have very specific or like very familiar shapes. When we see them like this graph is called a spectrogram. Next to the E, we have another dip, because that's an L. It's still voiced, but not as strongly as a vowel. So we can see a little dip there after the E. And right after that, we see a long O right there, because they're both saying hello. And so far with the information that we've collected with this survey, we've been able to see that it seems like they do have an easier time saying vowels, especially open vowels like and o and ah, versus their consonants. It's a little bit more difficult for them to pronounce them in a way that approximates or comes closer to the way humans say them. But yeah, so another part of this project that our collaborators in Europe are working on is the musicality of these parrots, right? So musicality is something that's hasn't really been found in species outside of humans. It's not common at all, but there has been some evidence that parrots at least can perceive rhythm, which would be really, really interesting when we're studying the evolution of musicality in human beings. So Dr. Honing and Dr. Spearings, Dr. Secchi, and Dr. Hoshili are studying this separately. So if you're interested in learning more about the musicality of parrots, feel free to reach out to all of them, because they've been working on this for a while now. And so, like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in contributing, I would be extremely appreciated. We currently have around 50 responses to our Sing Along and Speech Project survey in English, but we don't have a wide variety of species just yet. We have a couple of African greys, a couple of Amazons, we have one eclectus, a couple of budgies, and a cockatiel, but we would love to be able to do comparisons across a wider variety of species. So we would greatly, greatly appreciate if any one of you would be able to participate in our survey. So like I mentioned, it's just a recording of or however many recordings you'd like to share with us of your parrot speaking, singing, whistling, or making sounds that they've learned from you or from others. And then sending us a recording of the person who taught the parrot to say these things, so that we can use those like recordings and kind of like overlay them and compare them and see how similar they are.
Yeah, so I will jump back in here and I will just say it's been really fun. Like as a researcher, one of the most exciting things as a researcher is to get new types of data. And so we have gotten really incredible data from people who live with companion parrots in terms of on the What Does Polly Say survey, just numbers of different things that those birds can say. And then on the Bird Sing Along and Speech Project survey, recordings of the birds and recordings of the human model, so that we can start to really ask interesting questions like Wynn and Karla are asking about why have parrots evolved to have these huge repertoires, some of them, and what can they actually copy, right? What are the sounds they can produce better than others? So we would absolutely love it if we could have a little discussion after this and tell you more about what we're doing, answer all of your questions about that. We also encourage you to please check out the website, fill out the surveys, fill them both out. We love having both of the surveys filled out for the same bird, because then we have information about how many different things can this bird say, and here are some examples, which is really excellent. If you go to that manyparrots.org website, you find both surveys there. It's very easy to find them. And we also, if you are on any Facebook groups or parrot listservs or anything like that, we would love for you to send them a link to our website and encourage them to contribute to this research as well. We hope that you are finding these research questions are interesting, all the things that we've said to you today. We hope these are interesting topics to you. And if they are, yeah, we would just love to talk a little more about them. We have plenty of time now, I think, to chat and answer some questions. And I will just end by thanking all of the groups that have helped us in the past. So for example, the World Parrot Trust has been fantastic in advertising our surveys on their publications, their magazines, their social media. So has Bird Tricks, Facebook parrot groups, Parrot Twitter, and really everyone else who has helped us get the word out so that we can get so much data on so many different birds. So I will end that there, and thanks to everyone who's been listening. I see there are messages in the chat, although I haven't caught up with them, but yeah, we'd love to open this up for some discussion.
Marvelous. This is so important. I think it's novel, and we all need to jump in and do our part, because you're doing great work. I was wondering, you know, the bird with the world record for talking, I think, is Disco the parakeet. Is that right? And I don't even know if Disco's still alive or if you've reached out, but Disco, as I recall, has very expansive vocabulary.
Yes, it is incredible. And actually, we are asking ourselves these questions about what are the, so we have to follow all appropriate human research protocols and things like that. And we need to talk with our research advisors to see whether things posted on YouTube and elsewhere are fair game for us to analyze, or whether, you know, we need permission from the people who post them. But yes, that is an incredible source of just sounds that birds make. Disco, yes, was amazing. And so accurate.
He passed away. That's too bad, because he really would have been the quintessential candidate for your studies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I see someone knows is Human Mom. If you would want to put us in touch, we would. I mean, I know there are incredible recordings already out there, and if we could use some of those and analyze them, that would be amazing.
Yes, agreed. Can you give us a sense of how long each of the surveys take, so people can kind of know what they have time for, et cetera?
Absolutely, yeah. So what does Polly say? The longest part is just counting the number of words and phrases your bird says. So I would recommend, you know, over the next, maybe you know him. If your bird doesn't have a huge repertoire, you might be able to just write this down pretty quickly. Otherwise, you might want to spend a day or two just in the back of your head writing down everything it says and getting that there. But once you have a pretty good list of what they say, it should take about 15 minutes to fill out.
Each of them, or together?
No, so that's the first, the what does Polly say? And then the other one, we have many fewer responses to the Sing Along and Speech project, because that requires a recording. And we know it's so hard to get your parrot to cooperate, right? To say, okay, I'm going to record you saying this word or phrase right now. Of course, they never do it when you want them to.
Right.
Yeah. So if you have recordings already, you can absolutely submit those recordings to us. And when you submit the recording, we ask that you tell us a little bit about that recording, and also provide recording of yourself, or if you weren't the human that the bird learned from. Ideally, we want the model that the bird learned from. So a recording of yourself saying the same thing. And we do have space in that survey for you to upload a whole bunch of recordings. You can upload, 5, 10, 15. If you have that many recordings, we would love to get them. So that one certainly takes a little longer. And we know that that is a big hurdle. So we thank you in advance if you are willing to give us recordings, because hopefully we've made it fairly straightforward to upload those recordings. If you already have them, I mean, that maybe 20, 30 minutes with multiple recordings, I think it would take. Getting the recordings is harder. You can always record if you're not sure how to record. We also on the website have tips about how to record just with a smartphone. There are really good apps where you can just point your smartphone at the bird and click record and get a recording that way and upload that.
It's probably how most people will do it. Yeah. Out of the thousands of birds that have come to us, I'm scrolling in my head. I know some of them have come with, as part of their relinquishment paperwork, pages of things that they say. So we need to go back and find those birds and get them in your system because, and a lot of times it's, of course, grays, Amazons, macaws. Those seem to be the biggest ones, which is why it was such a surprise to me when I heard that Disco had the world's record for speaking. And you said you have some parakeets in your study, right? I think that's awesome.
Yeah. There's more diversity than we expected. We were sort of surprised. We knew we would get more grays than anything else, but we didn't realize how many of so many other species we would get.
And people think of the little bird as just, the little bird, when actually it's got a big personality and a lot of skills. Yeah. Somebody wants to know if they should fill out surveys for birds that don't talk or make human noises. So I guess that, Rachel, does that mean you're asking about bird sounds? Maybe she can give us.
Yeah, so if they're making just bird sounds, then that's basically no, that's not exactly the topic of our study. And we know that birds make a lot of amazing bird sounds. And we actually have a question. You can start on the What Does Polly Say survey, and halfway through it will say, does your bird mimic human speech or human noises? And if the answer is no, it'll just say, thank you, you're done. So we're happy to have you fill it out and have a record of a species that has no human sounds, because we do like to have that data, but most of the survey you wouldn't fill out. We don't necessarily need recordings of bird noises, just because our method of standardizing across species is counting and using human mimicry. So we're really focused on that.
How about like at the landing here, we have a macaw pair, and they're always hard to find homes for because they're a pair. But sometimes the male gets into this long diatribe with the, and it sounds like there's a big conversation going on with only a word decipherable here and there. Are you looking for jibber jabber like that, or do you want clear words?
More clear words are more helpful to us.
Okay.
But things like that are okay. We'll take whatever you record, but yeah, more clearer words are helpful to us.
Because sometimes birds come through us that clearly have been home listening to the answering machine, and you get the feeling that they're like repeating the recording of the answering machine, but it's not real clear. The words are not real clear, especially if it's a paragraph. So I guess that still can't hurt to send it. At least you have a database.
Yeah. And in that case, the ones that are most valuable to us are things like that, where you have the recording, but you also have the sound that it learned from. So if you had like the sound source, that's the very best. But yeah, no, we will look at everything. We appreciate everything everybody wants to submit.
And what about birds talking to each other? Even if it's not jibber jabber, it's actual conversation. That does happen.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if it's human words, that would be great. And even better if you can send us a recording of a human saying the same words after. And you can record the human afterwards. You can record the birds and what they're saying, and record the human saying those things.
Yeah, just for everybody's benefit, I was asking them before we got started about a recording I have where I asked my macaw, what does the duck say? What does the cat say? What does the dog say? And she answers, exactly right each time. And then they suggested that I go back and record those words, meow, quack, quack, whatever, so they can make that mimicry comparison. So that's easy enough to do. Yeah. Let's see, somebody said the name of Disco's owner. If I just don't want you guys to miss that. Judy Myers Bolton.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Disco was one of a kind. Yeah. Let's see. I think we answered Cheney's question already about other parrots. So the best thing we can do to help you guys is to just continue to get the word out, and your song related one is you're hoping to get all of that over this next semester. So we need to get on that, right? And then what are you doing when your study goes longer or?
Mine's about the same length of time as well. I do come with more of a robust background in data, but I'll take any and all.
Okay. So in other words, the bottom line is before next summer, they hope to have collected all the data and organized it. So we need to get with it, guys, and put the word out to all our friends, as we all know birds that talk or sing. Sometimes what happens if they're singing along with a song, like on the radio or whatever? That's often common. Can you separate that, parse that out?
It's a little harder for us to analyze, but yeah, we will still take that.
Okay.
Our musicality group, I think, is very interested in that, to see how well the bird matches the pitches and tones of the music.
Okay. Or we can send it in anonymously if we're the ones singing along with the bird and we don't want to be identified for our bad singing capabilities.
Right. Well, that's actually why we need the research ethics permission. So because there are human voices on those recordings, we treat that as absolutely, protected information and confidential. And so we would never share recordings of you or anything like that. That's all. We'll analyze them behind the scenes and then we'll report, oh yeah, these species are really good at matching, but we're not going to, of course, put any human voices out.
All right, because that's definitely when I can get my birds to sing, even if it's la la la, but the more off pitch it seems, the better. They get more animated when it's more dramatic. So yeah. All right. Well, I think that's great. I hope a lot of people will watch this recording in the future and continue to send in the data and take your surveys and bolster these projects, because they're super important to our understanding of this, the wisdom and the intelligence of parrots, which we know. Yeah,
Right.
it all started with dancing, and that became such a big thing when the cockatoo could dance. Well, we all knew that. They all have rhythm. Yeah. So, but then they took that to a scientific level, right? And did the research and said, this is why, and the brain is this and that. And so you're doing the same thing, but from a vocal perspective. So I think it's great. It's wonderful.
We are. And we really appreciate all contributions. And one final thing I will say is that whenever we publish any scientific articles that result from this, we are always publishing them in journals that are free and available to the public. So any data you contribute, you can go see the science. We're always making that completely available. We're not identifying you or any personal information, but the results are always available to everyone who contributes, because we want to make sure that this is really a shared collaborative project between us and all of you wonderful people that know what the birds are doing, that can help us collect a really great data set so that we can understand all of those differences between species. And hopefully that will feed back both to how you can interact with your parrot, what we know about parrot care among captive parrots, and things we can do to help conserve wild parrots out there and understand how they are learning and communicating with each other.
Exactly. I mean, this goes perfectly in the enrichment category, which most captive parrots are so deprived of. So the more we can amplify that kind of social interaction, the better. Well, does the University of Colorado focus on other bird related things? I mean, I think it's great. The three of you are given so much room to develop these investigations.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So we are not Cornell. We don't have tons of people. We are essentially the bird lab at the University of Northern Colorado. We have other students in the lab as well, studying, related and other things. But yeah, we're not like Cornell, who has tons and tons of bird researchers at UNC. It's me, but that's part of why we created this really good collaborative group with all of our collaborators across the United States and in the Netherlands and in Japan and Poland, so that we have a great network of scientists working on this.
That's great. Well, Wynn and Karla, did you specifically go there so you could work with Dr. Benedict, or did you just end up there and decide, oh, birds are cool, I want to go that way?
I specifically messaged Lauryn on Twitter about this project originally, and through that we got here. I specifically came to UNC to work with Lauryn.
That's wonderful. Good. Keep inspiring parrot knowledge. Yeah. How about you, Wynn?
I mean, kind of the same thing. I hunted Lauryn down.
Well, she's clearly an inspiration. That's great. Well, we need more of you. Keep you know, especially as the parrots face such challenges in the wild, it's more and more important that we understand them. Yeah. In fact, in my opinion, this supports conservation because it just amplifies how smart birds are and why we need to protect them. So that's a big part of our mission at Phoenix Landing as well. So
Yeah, that's actually a big part of why I'm in this project, because I worked in a conservation project for one of the most threatened Amazon species in the world, and I feel like the communication and like vocal learning aspect of parrots and in Amazon specifically is extremely important to their conservation and to their ability to continue to survive in the wild. So that's also a
right.
big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right. Well, did you which Amazon and which organization? I'm curious.
Oh, so I worked with the Puerto Rican Amazon.
Oh,
I was directly employed by the World Parrot Trust, but I was working with the
ah,
Department of Natural
right.
Resources in Puerto Rico.
Yep.
So yeah, it's specifically that Amazon down in the Caribbean.
That's great. Well, you guys might be interested to know that, and you know, in the eco tours we sponsor, and I'm a green wing person. I take audio of the wild birds and then I come back and I play it for my birds. Well, my green wings could care less about the green wings in Brazil, but when they heard the Peruvian ones, they really perked up. So, I mean, it was almost like some of those dialect studies you're hearing about, like parrotlets and, you know, grays who give names to their chicks in the wild, that kind of thing that's being studied too. So, yeah, there's something about dialects, and probably that's becoming more and more important as the birds lose their geographic regions and they're kind of in small clusters now. They don't have the genetic, they can't cross over like they used to. So they're becoming smaller little tribes, so to speak. I bet their language is becoming more unique to them in those areas.
Yeah,
We
and we
work
need to
with them.
know, sorry.
Yeah,
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 and we need to know which parrots are able to learn new things and at what point in their lifetime, so that if we're putting them into conservation groups or moving new flocks around, we're doing it in a way where we know that that bird is going to be able to integrate socially into the new group and learn that local language and really fit in and do well. So I do hope that a lot of the results we learn here about species and age differences and sexes and so on can be used for that.
that would be awesome to correlate. Yeah, I know we're working with some of the conservationists to talk about when and why parrots die in captivity versus when and how old they are when they die in the wild. And, you know, there are some correlations and there are some major differences. So I'm sure you're going to find the same with mimicry. But so interesting, so intriguing. Well, kudos to you guys for having the passion to get this done. It's just wonderful. So we'll do our part to try to rally as much support as we can, and don't hesitate to reach out and ask us to do more of it anytime. And I hope everybody here today can contribute. Please spread the word. So, all right. Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to say in summary?
I just want to say thank you so much for having us and for supporting these projects. You know, it's been wonderful to talk to you all. And if anybody wants to get in contact, if you go to the website and the About Us information, our email information is there. And there's also a contact form that you can submit at any time and we'll respond. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, well, happy holidays to everybody. And thanks to all our listeners and all you do for parrots. You know, we have a wonderful community near and dear to my heart. So anyway, thanks to everybody. And we'll see you, I hope, January 11th with to talk about hormones, that big bad word that we default to way too often. Anyway, okay, thanks again, you guys from Colorado. We're very grateful that you were able to step in at the last minute and give us such a wonderful presentation. Thank you, thank you. All right, bye everybody. See you hopefully next month. Happy holidays.